why are we eating this thing, these carbohydrates, if we have to then increase this dosage? Surely we just simple thing would be to not eat so many carbohydrates. And you would think I was coming from another planet, even though that seems really sensible to me.
Thank you so much for joining me. Today I have Coach Stephen, and we're going to talk about all things carnivore. And Stephen, why don't you start with just kind of giving me a rundown of how you became a carnivore and what you do?
Yeah, that's fine. I can do that. I started at age 55. I joined MeatRx after being keto for a fair few years, and before that, low carb. I was low carb at 50, keto just before carnivore. And like I say, 55, I decided to do a 30-day challenge. As I've said on many interviews, I had not heard of Sean Baker or Joe Rogan until I got to my 54th birthday. And by 55, I was pretty convinced about carnivore might be a thing for me to try. So I did a 30-day challenge, was trained up to be a MeatRx coach as well. And here I am, 4 years later. It's looking good. I'm enjoying the carnivore thing. If you want to know why I looked at that sort of eating in the first place, like the low carb, why did I get into that? Well, in my 40s, 30s, and 20s, and even before that, I was a semi-professional soccer player for a bit. I won a tennis tournament. I did a bodybuilding show, and I was high carb, and I was really the poster boy for that sort of way of eating. I didn't eat, I didn't drink alcohol, I didn't smoke, I did everything healthily, apparently, skim milk, freshly squeezed orange juice, oatmeal. We call it porridge here, but basically doing all the stuff, not having fat, cutting the fat off red meat. If I ever did eat it, which was very rarely, I had chicken, rice cakes. Oh boy, rubbish. And so in my early years, I seemed to be doing okay. But as I got older, I realized that even though I was incredibly active, I trained to be a personal trainer. That was many, many years ago, maybe in my 30s. So yeah, and I was training. I got to train an Olympic athlete in javelin throwing and was getting more advanced qualifications because you need those to do those sort of things. I became an FA, which is Football Association coach. I coach soccer, as you call it in America. And I was getting more and more qualified, and I was doing everything right. And then in my 40s, I was a middle distance runner. I've got some medals sort of over there for that. But I was getting plumper. I was getting tubbier. I was getting lower left quadrant pain. I was getting very gassy. I was getting rashes. Athlete's foot was terrible and had been for like 30 years. And I realized, actually, when I was training this athlete, I won't give too much away. She was a type 1 diabetic. So I decided that I really needed to be completely qualified in that. So I trained in obesity and diabetes to be a specialist practitioner. And that's when I started to join the dots, because when we were talking about medications, because obviously you've got to learn all about the medications, all the dosage was in relation to carbohydrates. Now, I know in this space, most people will know this, but they didn't. I kept putting my hand up as an outsider, not coming through the medical profession. Why are we eating this thing, these carbohydrates, if we have to then increase this dosage? Surely simple thing would be to not eat so many carbohydrates. And you would think I was coming from another planet, even though that seems really sensible to me. And it was still that sort of eat 6 meals a day. And at that point, actually, they were still saying, well, diabetics wake up and they need to eat straight away because their blood sugar will be low. Of course, we know that is absolute rubbish now, having dealt with at least 500 diabetic clients. They never, ever complain of waking up with low blood sugar. That is absolutely, completely not the truth. I mean, more than often they would say, wow, it's way too high. I'm really worried about it. So the things like the continual glucose monitors and the Keto Mojo and all that have been a real godsend, actually. But anyway, long story short was that I realized things were wrong. I really did realize that what I was doing was wrong, and I was perfect proof. And then I suppose use this phrase, the icing on the cake was going to get a coronary artery calcium scan, which, should have been 0 because I was super healthy. And it was 639, which is really high. So when I had that scan, I actually said to the radiologist, this is going to be really high. They looked me up and down, and this is a big problem to get for people out there. And she said, no, you look fine. You look fine. And the thing is, you can mask a lot of problems if you are doing lots and lots of exercise and you are abstaining from sort of alcohol and smoking and things like that. But actually, it's just a Band-Aid, all of those things. I was just not able to, get my weight in the right place, to be honest. I had a little hissy fit, threw out all my shirts because I couldn't get into them. I mean, really, it was very frustrating because I was doing all the things I was supposed to do. I mean, all this stuff about, well, if you're gaining weight, you're not complying or you're overeating. That's all absolute rubbish. I was eating the wrong things. That's the bottom line. So I learned that. And then I got to 50 and I thought, a British phrase here, stuff this for a game of soldiers. I'm going to go low carb. I'm going to do everything opposite. And I've used this before, actually, in an interview. I didn't realize at the time, but I was a big fan of Seinfeld. And there is an episode there where the character George realizes that he has done he's followed all these things all his life and it's always been a failure. So if he did the opposite, it surely would be a success. So I genuinely thought, right, it seems like low carb is pretty much saying to do the opposite of everything I've been told. Let's give that a crack. And of course, it was brilliant. I mean, I lost obviously water weight at first, but everything resolved, and I'd also at that point, by the way, I'd qualified to be a phlebotomist. So I was lucky enough to do bloods and I saw my pre-diabetes absolutely plummet. So that was, well, I haven't got that now. I mean, I'm on no medications. Here I am, nearly 59, and it's been the best thing I did. So the last 9 years have been the best thing for my health, my body composition, many things I haven't even mentioned yet, but just tons and tons of stuff got better. And I think it's that if I take a few carbs out and I feel better, and this is where keto popped in, if I take a few carbs out, if I take a load of carbs out, is that going to be even better? And then eventually I realized taking them all out or as close as possible to all out, surely that's going to be really good. And yeah, I thought that was good. An interesting thing for people that are interested in hormones and interested in the bloods, I took I did a full panel actually the day before I started Carnivore. And within 30 days, my testosterone, so you've got to remember, I was 55, my testosterone went up by 30% in 30 days of Carnivore. So that is not possible, allegedly, but it happened, and it wasn't a freak thing because I now have seen that with other people that have given me bloods. I'm not saying that will happen to everybody, by the way, but for guys of my age, that's important, but it's also for females because testosterone's, an important hormone for everybody, basically. So that's the long story shortened by quite a considerable amount. But I just decided that with the specialist practitioner status, and also I've got an honours science degree in physiology and health sciences, which I did in later life as well. So it all locked together. Everything just totally made sense. Absolutely everything. So I thought, this is definitely the place to be. Yeah, still a niche, sadly. And obviously, we're fighting a tsunami of misinformation about carbs and plant-based material because it's not food. And I just know this is the right thing. And I just got literally hundreds of clients now. So I feel much more confident it isn't an N equals 1. I'm going more towards 1,000 clients that have benefited from this, or definitely from low carb, definitely from keto, and quite a huge percentage from carnivore now.
That's wonderful. Have you had another CAC score since then?
No, I mean, the biggest problem there, and I have been asked this quite a few times, is after the restrictions, there's a huge waiting list for procedures, and I'm not going to try and jump ahead of a list and take someone else's space just for a bit of biohacking. I'm going to wait till the waiting list has gone down. And we're talking before the restrictions. I think the waiting list for all sort of treatment was on average about 1,000 people waiting 30 days. Now it's in the millions. So there's no way. Yeah, it's really bad. So I'm not going to do that.
Okay. So since you have so many clients and you've helped so many people, can you easily give us a list, not a huge list, but a few different things that you have helped people heal or seen people resolve on a carnivore or low carb diet?
Yeah. So let's talk about sort of the things that get a lot of attention. The quickest resolution of diabetes that I've seen is someone completely off metformin within 7 weeks. I'm not saying that will happen to everybody, but things like that never happened when I was high carb and training people. Obviously weight loss, I've got people from 100 pounds, 120 pounds, 80 pounds, tons and tons of weight has come off. Anxiety is a big one, underrated. I think a lot of people say that they can cope with stress a lot better. So that's good. Sleep issues tend to resolve. Gut issues, just time and time again. Low level things like a lot less gas, which, is embarrassing for people. The skin rashes is a big one. To be honest, it's just so varied. Thyroid, actually, that is definitely a big one. That tends to be mainly females actually have those problems. And the good thing about thyroid, for instance, is because you're doing lots of bloods, or I'm lucky enough to have clients that come to me that have done bloods historically. For some have done it for decades. You can really see the data. You can categorically say, look, your TPO antibodies are going down, your TG antibodies are going down. So your thyroid appears to be healing. So in that empirical data, along with, the clinical presentation of these people, it's just amazing. In general, it's the general well-being, lower blood pressure. That's a really big one. But that's so common. And I don't know if you get this, Serena, but you get a little bit blasé, because you hear it so often. So someone will say, my blood pressure's down. Well, when I first started it, and I can remember actually doing these, before the restrictions, saying, having a little group of 10 people, in a room every single month. Oh, my blood pressure's gone down. It's gone this. And I'll be really, wow, that's amazing. And now people sort of say it. And I'm almost like, yeah, okay, what else? So, I love doing stuff like this because it makes me check where I am in my coaching, because that's a big deal you see for somebody else. And I have heard it so many times. And It is all diet, by the way. I mean, there's no sort of other hacks. I don't give people these supplements to do and these special exercises or breathing. All of those things have a place, by the way. In the main, I'm pretty much, let's get your diet on point, and a lot of things will resolve.
Yeah, it's so interesting that people's blood pressure goes down on the carnivore diet, because we typically use so much more salt than your average person, but everybody thinks high blood pressure is caused by salt. And
Yes.
It's just not. There are so many ways that we have been lied to, over the years. It's so confusing for people. So one of the other questions that I have for you, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of your personal training stuff here, because you're so good at those kinds of things. So I wanted to talk about building muscle with carbohydrates. So many people think we have to have the carbohydrates to build muscle. And so I'd like to know, how is it that we build muscle without carbohydrates? Because it obviously happens. And why are people so confused about that?
I think it's because, and I'm not picking up on your terminology, it's because people say that thing and they don't add the word dietary carbohydrates.
Yes.
So
yes, that's right.
We need carbohydrates, yes, but we don't need to eat them. And that's the thing. That is the nuance that people miss. Our liver makes carbohydrate for us. It makes glucose for us. We don't need to eat it. If you get it from the liver, it's demand driven. So you're not having too many or not enough. And your body knows how many carbohydrates you need. You can make glucose from non-carbohydrate substrates. And that's totally fine. And that's probably the best way to get them. So when you work out, what do you need? Well, firstly, you need to elicit a physiological response. You need to make your body. So, I've used this example quite a few times, but if I got this pen and I started to do a bicep curl with this pen, I'm not going to get a central nervous system reaction because it's too light. So the first thing, you've got to put the work in. Secondly, you do need to have protein, because protein builds the structure of the muscle. It makes things in your body, basically. So the protein synthesis needs to happen. What's often missed out is the fact that you also need fats. So when you have a muscle cell growing, it isn't just protein building cross bridges and all those sort of things. There's also membranes which have fat. The muscle cell has membranes and it needs fat. So this is why things like having a high protein diet where you're cutting out the fat is not as good as having whole food, for instance, because if you have a ribeye, you're going to get the protein and the fat. Now, where's the carbohydrates in that? I don't know. What do? They don't know anything. The glucose that is in your bloodstream, that's powering you. That's giving you some ability to move and obviously make the muscle contract. but you don't need to be stuffing yourself with carbohydrates to make that happen. We produce them. We produce about a teaspoon. We need about a teaspoon in 5 liters of blood constantly. And then when you start to work out, that demand ramps up and your body just does it. Absolutely does it. Because it's brilliant. It's been doing it for 300,000 years. It knows what you need to do. It does not need you to be eating a banana 2.5 hours beforehand. That's completely irrelevant. So to me, it's an odd question, because it's the way it's presented that is confusing for people. Because they also use that argument when they say, "Oh, your brain needs glucose." Yeah, it does, but we make it. So what? We need 120. I think it's 120 grams over a 24-hour period to run the brain on average. Possibly not mine because it runs a bit slower, but it's demand driven, and the liver does it. Gluconeogenesis is a thing. We do it all the time. I mean, when everybody is asleep, your liver is making sure you have enough blood glucose. It's not a thing that only happens if you're cutting out carbs. It's a thing that happens because it's a physiological response to your demand-driven need for glucose. It really is that simple, but it's not dietary glucose, and I think that's the thing. So when you first start to work out and you're not fully fat adapted, so you're using fats for energy, fats in the process of producing energy, because you still need glucose, the breakdown of glycogen in your muscles. Some people find it a little bit difficult because they're used to carbing up, which does help with water retention, which does help with, working out at first. But once you're fat adapted, actually your workouts improve. So when you first come over to eating low carb, you might see a little dip in your performance at first, but then after it's much better. And even this is true with endurance, for instance. So I was talking about weight training, building muscle, because that was the question. But even in endurance, if you look at the common sense of it, on average, an athlete will have, I hate word calories, but everyone understands it, 2,000 calories of energy on you as glucose on board. So that's when you do a marathon, you might hit the wall because after about 23 miles, you have depleted that glucose. But we got 54,000 calories of fat on us. So what's the best energy source? What's going to see you going longer? Because once you're adapted to it, fat is going to be the best source.
Yeah, and you're never going to run out. That's why carnivores don't have those sugar crashes. Like if you just eat meat and fats, protein and fat, your blood glucose and your insulin levels stay like this all day, which is exactly what we want. We don't want those spikes and then have it crash. Those aren't good for you. And that's what causes insulin resistance and insulin problems for people. So it makes perfect sense if you look at it the way you said it. It makes perfect sense. So let me ask you, do you recommend that people work out every day or take rest days?
Well, I very rarely recommend anyone works out every day. Because actually working out, it's more about that training response. So again, I like to use silly examples so people get the principle. So if you're watching some athlete and they were in a competition on a Monday, and then they were in a competition on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they were constantly doing that, or your favorite team was in a big, high pressure match, or a tennis player was playing every single day, at some point you're going to go, that performance has got to drop off. Right. So once we've established, we need to recover, let's apply that to our training. If you work out really hard and you don't have a rest day, what's happening? You're just pushing maybe your body a little bit further. You need the training response. Training per se isn't the thing that's doing it. It's your body recovering and repairing from it. That's the key to this. So I would say when I start getting big successes, so, one of the guys I trained, 54 years old, 4 stones overweight, so that's about 50 pounds overweight, a smoker. Within a year, he was in the top 20% of marathon runners in the world. So you can get a huge difference. Yeah, exactly. That's a nice reaction. And that's how I felt. But the problem was, the reason I use that example, absolutely addicted to it, and understandably, because that's a huge thing. And I kept saying to him, you're beginning to get niggly injuries. You're overdoing it because you're thinking more is more. And we need to dial back to where we were training you and you were having rest days. So I had to change rest days because that was guilting him out to recovery days. And then I even started to say, this is your planned program recovery day, because people think, oh, I haven't trained today, it's really bad, and they worry too much. And the body doesn't work like that. It does need to recover, it does need to repair, and you're going to injure yourself if you go too hard. I've just actually set up a new program where people are just working out 3 times to 4 times a week, and the maximum time they're spending in the gym is 20 minutes. And that's getting huge results. So, that's going to help you sleep. But I'm also very wary. I'm now hearing people being told not to work out at all because that's a stressor. Well, yeah, it's good stress and there's bad stress. And exercise is a sort of good stress. If you do too much, it's a bad stress. And that word "too much" actually is really critical here. Is getting the right amount for you to work out. Feel that you've pushed yourself a bit. Your central nervous system picks it up, gives you the physiological response, and you recover. So doing the right amount is really important for you as well, and also for your goals. So if someone goes online, sees an influencer saying you need to do strength training, and they actually want to run, and they want to run a marathon, you can't ignore what a person would like to do in their life. The mental well-being is one of those things that tops everything else, for instance. So I'm going to now contradict myself in one respect. If someone says, well, I need to work out because that's the thing that gets me away from my stress, gets me away from family life that's a bit difficult, it gets me out of the house, gets me in the sunlight, gives me a chance to process things that are going on, gives me a chance to download, then I would say, well, then you need to probably work out as much as you're doing that's keeping your mental ability where it is, and your anxiety levels nice and low. So it's never a one size fits all. And I definitely have adapted that program, for instance, to a couple of people already who said, I really need to work out every day because I just feel so good. Yeah. But they're not pushing themselves to a limit. I think that's the thing. They're probably sort of plodding along is probably the wrong word, but they're not really going to their physiological limit. I think they're just going out and going through the motions in some respect, but actually it's more for their mental well-being. So there's no one size fits all for me, but in the main, try to moderate it and just make sure you recover enough.
So cardio or no cardio, and if so, what kind?
Cardio if you want to be a marathon runner. If you want something that. But I'm not a big fan of cardio, certainly for weight loss. So let's get right into the nitty gritty. If someone comes to me and they says, I want to lose weight, you're a personal trainer, all right? I want to be on the treadmill, and I want to be on a bike, and I want to do that. And I say, well, whoa. Let's talk about your nutrition first. If they're not interested in talking about their nutrition, or let's put it this way, if their nutrition is poor, they've already told me how poor it is, I would not train that person. This is why I'm not a multimillionaire, because I turn more people away than I accept, because nutrition is key. I had a nice conversation with Keto Savage the other day, and he said, it was 100% nutrition, but it's also 100% training. And they do go hand in hand. So those sort of things are important to know. If your nutrition's on point, you will improve your body composition, that without training. So that awful phrase, you don't need to exercise, is true. You can get your body composition to be really good. But if you want to work out, I think for your bone density in particular, your muscle mass, your general well-being, I think nothing beats the strength training. And you don't need cardio at all, because even strength training is a cardiovascular workout, because when you break down the words, cardio is your heart, the vascular system is delivery of nutrients through the veins and arteries. So when you pick up a heavy weight, your blood pressure goes up because your heart is pumping harder and it's delivering those nutrients to your muscles. So that's a cardiovascular workout. I think the way we talk about things is one of the things that changes how we think. So when you said earlier about, do we need carbohydrates to build muscle? Most people are surprised when I go, yes, because the nuance there is the word dietary. Do we need dietary carbohydrates to build muscle? No. The other thing is macros. I mean, we could talk about that as well, if you don't mind, just very quickly, because people say, I want to talk about macros. And I say, right, okay, why why are you talking about macros? And they say, well, because there's 3 macronutrients. I need to know about my fats, protein, carbohydrates. And I said, well, there isn't 3 macronutrients, because if you break the word down, macro means large, and nutrient is relating to how much food you're having. So the large amount of nutrients, in my way of eating, I don't have a macronutrient called carbohydrate, because it's a micronutrient. It's actually not even in my way of thinking. But because people say, oh, there are 3 main macros of this, that's embedded. Oh, right, I've got to get my macros in. I've got to get my fat, protein, carbs in. No, look at the word. What's it actually saying? Oh, a large percentage of your nutrients are coming from fats and proteins. So they're the 2 macronutrients. Carbohydrate isn't a macronutrient. For those that are eating high carb, low fat, fat isn't a macronutrient, because they're not eating lots of fat. So it's just, I think it's very clever how the food industry and how the way the media talk about food, and it just seeps in, and you think, oh yeah, that's a macronutrient, carbohydrate. Well, it isn't, because we're not eating lots of it. Simple as that.
Yeah. So do you have an opinion on how much fat and how many carbs somebody should be eating in a day?
Yeah.
What?
I do.
What is it? Tell us.
I'm just teasing you. I was just teasing you there. Right. Again, it's very, very individual, because, if you were 6'4" and you were a sumo wrestler, it would be very different to a 4'11" person that wants to run 100 miles, and be an ultra marathon, but competitor. But I think this rule of thumb of 1 gram for 1 pound of lean body mass is a good starting point. So if you weigh 100 pounds, you need 100 grams of protein, 100 grams of fat, actually. And that's obviously by weight. But that doesn't mean you have 100 gram ribeye, because a ribeye is mainly water. So you normally have to times it by 4. So if you're 100 grams of protein is what you require, then you need to eat a 400 gram slice of ribeye, if you get my drift. But that ratio is what's in nature. That's why I mentioned ribeye or an egg, for instance. It's 1-to-1 by weight. So it seems like, we've been eating these foods for 300,000 years. We're sort of accustomed to those ratios. Why do we need to play with them? Well, the reason we need to play with them is because we've been stupid in the past, and we might have had a 30-year calorie-restricted low-fat diet, and our body needs a bit more extra fat. And this is where the problems start to arise, because then you get the sort of glib where you need to eat, 115 grams of butter every day on top of what you're doing. You need to add butter, or you need to add fats. Well, that works for people that are really, destitute in their fat stores, or the way they've eaten in the past, because fats are really essential as sort of, coenzymes for hormones, for instance. The myelin sheath is made out of fats. The membranes are made out of fats. So sometimes when you start this way of eating, the body just sucks up that extra fat, because it's been wanting it for 30 years. It's needed it to make stuff. This is why you see people resolve like thyroid issues, for instance, or they get less anxious, because all of those things require fat. Neurotransmitters, there's many things. So I don't get too hung up on people saying eat extra fat, or you need to have 30 grams of protein per meal, because I understand where it's coming from. But in the end, we have hunger signals and we have satiety signals, and in the end, that's going to be the thing that will get you there eventually. You just have to get through a whole lot of adaptation first, and then you will be eating instinctively, which is how we've done it up until about 100 years ago. And I love all these things now where there's lots of footage of different places in the world in the 1960s, and it's like, why are these people not all fat? How are they doing this? And it's everywhere, all over the world. There's all this footage now on, Instagram, saying, look at them, not a one obese person there. What's happening? And these are in rich places, because there's always the idiot that says, well, yeah, they didn't have any money. They didn't. Well, central New York, people coming out of the subway, they had some money, and they're in beautiful suits. There's no obese people there. So they was just eating to their hunger signals and stopping when they were full and just being sensible, really. And now we're in a world where we're so dysregulated, and so many sort of hyper palatable addictive foods are being produced. Well, they're not foods, food like products. We've lost that signal understanding. It's lost in the noise, and leptin is maybe not being received as well as it could. But once you start to go back to whole foods and you start to eat the right way, and you take out the seed oils and you take out all the processed stuff and you take out all the things in boxes and you take out sweeteners, artificial sweeteners and all that sort of stuff, your body just thanks you for it. And you don't really need to get, hung up on that. But when you first start, people like that guide. So you can do the 1.75 grams per kilogram of lean body weight, or the 1 gram per 1 pound of lean body mass. And don't forget to just times it by 4. So, if you're looking at protein, you get the right amount of protein.
And then as far as the fat goes, just fill in the rest with fat, right?
Yeah, I mean, fat and protein is about the same thing. And because you get more, there's more density to fat than there is to protein, then the ratio by sort of effective energy in there is about 70-30. So 70% fat, 30% protein.
Yeah. Now, do you recommend that people eat differently on a weightlifting day versus a cardio or rest day?
No.
As long as you're just eating meat and fat, you've got enough protein to build those muscles and sustain your energy.
Absolutely. Yes. And I mean, the thing is, I work out, and I've just done, and I have actually been doing an experiment, which I've hated because I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't work out. So I haven't really worked out since August of last year, which has been a nightmare. Yeah, absolute nightmare. Yeah. And, I've been back at training for 2 weeks, and I wanted to see how quickly things changed. I did an experiment in May where I gained 25 pounds deliberately and then lost about 27, just to show at my age you can do it. I'm not going to let people say, oh, it's too late, I can't do it at my age. So I thought I'd do it, and it was all on YouTube and stuff. And then I wanted to prove that not exercising wasn't the thing. It's all about nutrition. So I've not exercised since August, and it hasn't made a big difference. But the reason I'm saying this is because the one thing I did notice is once I started training again, I did get hungry after training, which never used to happen. So I've got to relearn that signaling.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you always recommend carnivore or like a low carb diet for your clients? And is there ever a time where you wouldn't really recommend that?
I'm going to answer the first question. Do I always recommend carnivore? No, because that depends on what they tell me about their situation. In the back of my head, I know that carnivore will be the thing that gives them the best return on their investment in their own life, because it is. I've yet to be convinced that there is a better way of doing it. But if they say to me, for instance, I live in a situation where my husband, he likes a little bit of veg. The kids definitely like a little bit of veg. And I just want to be part of the family. Well, you know what? Being part of your family is much more important than a dogmatic sort of, you will get 100% better with carnivore. So it is a little bit of a trade-off. I think for health, for virtually every situation, health-wise, if you were a single person and you did not impact on anyone else, then I think carnivore would be the thing I recommend 100% of the time. But I think in the real world, sometimes people just need that little bit of wriggle room. So coffee would be a really good example. Coffee is not carnivore. I don't recommend caffeinated coffee at all if people can keep away from it. It's a banned substance in many sports. It is a stimulant and can be problematic for a few reasons. But it can be a game changer. And now we spoke about, it's funny you mentioned it before we, started to record, you mentioned it sort of off the cuff. Well, I'm the same. If someone says to me, I'm going to go carnivore, but actually I need my morning coffee. It's the only thing that keeps me sane. I like to walk down to the end of the garden, sit on a bench I've got out there, watch the sun coming up and have a cup of coffee. It's not the same with a glass of water. I will give him 2 thumbs up or her 2 thumbs up and say, yeah, I get that. I absolutely get that. And if it keeps you in the game of carnivore, then keep it in your way of eating. Absolutely do that. It's not a problem. This water I have here, that has a splash of lime in it. That's not carnivore. So it doesn't have to be zero tolerance. But if someone came to me with an autoimmune condition that was absolutely blighting their life and they were depressed, I would say, you got to try carnivore, because then that's when you will know, just how good you can feel. And if you go as close to 100% as possible, or 100% if you can, then you're going to give yourself a little bit of a turnaround. And it's not for life either. And once you do that, and these are from real experiences, once that's happened and the psoriasis has gone, or whatever it is that you're trying to clear up has gone, or the thyroid's gone back, and the hot flashes have gone, or whatever it is, and that person will say, yeah, I'm a little bit bored with this. I want to try something else. I want some fish. It's like, well, okay, we'll just do it forensically. Don't go out and add loads of things all in the first week. Add some things, see how you get on. If you add some fish back, some scallops or mackerel or whatever, and everything's hunky-dory, great. That's now become part of your sort of repertoire of what you can eat. And next week we'll try eggs or whatever it is. And the thing is, a lot of people will do that and be really surprised at what they can add back in. But it's not the goal to add things back in. That's not the be all and end all, because it's more about how you feel as a person. Because I also have a couple of people that have gone really, 100% carnivore, and they feel so good. They'll message and just say, oh, this is for life. This is it. I just can't imagine not eating this way. And then everyone adapts to them, because they're seeing, if you've got someone that you love or you like a lot, or you care for, or they're in your family, whatever, and you see them excelling and being an absolute example of great health, you got to be pretty mean to say, stop eating the way you're eating, or stop doing what you're doing. So actually, most people in that situation will come around and say, right, it's okay to go to a restaurant and not have the potatoes. I mean, when you look at life like that, how ridiculous is it to be given, a hard time because you're not eating a potato? It's just crazy, isn't it? Yeah, but it's very weird, because I had a strange experience when I was high carb, but I was running, and I've never drunk at all. And I moved into a premises, and the landlord there was very flamboyant and seriously loaded, and very happy that I'd moved in, and liked me as a person. I'd just gone through a big divorce, and I think he had as well. So I guess he felt like all kindred spirits. I was just renting out some space, one of his properties, and he came around with a very expensive alcoholic drink to celebrate, that I'd moved in and it all settled well. And I just said, oh, I nearly mentioned his name there. I just went, I don't drink. And he was so offended. What do you mean? I mean, this is like a 25-year-old whiskey. It's really expensive. You're not even going to have one little sip. And absolutely flew off the handle about it. So it isn't just being carnivore. It's going against like a sort of convention. But yeah, in carnivore, I try to diffuse that sort of stupidity and say what I just said, basically. So you're getting hung up because I won't eat potatoes and I won't have some bread. I don't really get what the problem is here. And I think if you can try and see the humor in it and not worry too much, and people are, some people are very timorous and they can't do that sort of thing. So I say, well, just put it on your plate, believe it. Doesn't matter, just push it around. Because once you start eating and talking, if someone's that bad about this, that they're looking at you and say, you have not eaten any of your greens, it's like, well, lighten up.
Yeah. And I'm doing what's best for me and what makes me feel my best. If the potatoes and bread make you feel your best, then fine.
Yes, that's the other thing. I mean, knock yourself out. If you want to eat like that, that's fine. The thing, I suppose, this is the human nature side of me, wants to scream, look at the state of you. You've just spent half an hour moaning that you're on 8 medications, and you can't get into your genes. But I'm not a cruel person like that. But it goes through my mind sometimes, and you just think, it just is ludicrous, really, that people can be so narrow-minded. But hey, there's always going to be people that don't like what you're doing, and like you say, a little bit of. And certainly I've heard this from people who've lost weight where their friends have been overweight still and saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be doing that. Even though their blood pressure's gone down, they're off medications, they've lost 70 pounds. Again, true stories I'm relating here. And very often it's like a nurse or someone or a doctor who said it. You shouldn't be doing that. Even though they've got these, these lovely tick boxes of great things.
Yes.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay. And that brings us to our last question. Let's briefly touch on cholesterol, why it's not bad for us. because so many people, we've been indoctrinated about how cholesterol and fat are bad for us. So let's touch on that, that cholesterol is not bad for us, and eating so much dietary cholesterol does not raise our cholesterol in a bad way. And many, many of us are still extremely healthy and have what would be considered good cholesterol levels.
Yeah, it's a big question. I do have a study or studies that I send out to people that are worried about it. But first thing you just said, that's really interesting, because if you cut out your dietary cholesterol, your body will ramp up production of cholesterol. So there's a little clue there. You probably need cholesterol. And of course, all your cell membranes need cholesterol, and so do your hormones, and so does your bile. So it's, it's an essential element. The studies don't seem to agree with the hypotheses that lowering cholesterol makes you live longer. In fact, quite the reverse. When you look at hard endpoints, people actually dying, it seems that the lower your cholesterol, the greater the incidence of dying is. So that's not borne out by sort of any really good science. If your cholesterol is going up, does it also depend on what's the carrier? So LDL is the one they talk about, so low density lipoprotein. The cholesterol in there is the same as the cholesterol in the high density lipoprotein, which is allegedly good cholesterol. Well, it's the same cholesterol, it's a different lipoprotein. So for people that don't know, that's a high density lipoprotein is the name of the protein, the lipid protein carrier that has the things inside it. You also have VLDL, very low density lipoproteins, which carry cholesterol, triglycerides, those sort of things. But they are interesting markers, and there's IDL, and there's other things that you could look at. But when you're doing a lipid panel, most people are quite happy if their triglycerides are low and their HDL is high. And I get that, because when you look at incidences of, heart disease, it seems that people with that ratio seem to do better. But you can't say risk. This is the big thing, because you can't prove that there's any sort of causality there, because it's epidemiological. It could be other factors going on. So you can't categorically say that it's because of that. But there's a lot of coincidence that people that have high HDL and low triglycerides seem to have better outcomes, or live longer, or whatever you want to say, or less cardiovascular disease. But if you look at LDL, you see this is the one that pharmaceuticals can adapt. So this is the other thing. You have to think, well, what's the motivation? Because they tried, Big Pharma, to increase HDL with pharmaceuticals, but they can't do it. But they can lower LDL. They can do that. So is there a profit motive to this narrative? Is there? I don't know. But also they are dynamic. And for instance, VLDL is a very good marker of how receptive the cell is. So when you look at the liver, and the VLDL is the first thing out into the bloodstream, if you have high levels of VLDL, that's sort of showing you that you're not fat adapted. That's one of the things you could look at, because it's in the bloodstream because it's not been accepted by cells. It's not offloading some of its package, basically. If it does offload its package, it stops being VLDL and it becomes LDL, so it's all about the fact that this molecule gets to offload its package into the cells. So the cells are playing a big part here. Sorry to be a long answer. The other thing is there's different types of LDL. So people get into particle counts, and they get into big, fluffy, and small and dense, and all this sort of stuff. But I like to go one step back and say, well, if it's going up, why is it going up? So you could say, because we know it is a sort of band-aid, it's a thing that goes to rescue the arterial wall, for instance. Well, you're doing something to the arterial wall. So maybe you do need to take notice of it, because we want to know. I'm not saying high levels are dangerous or low levels are not dangerous. I'm just saying we need to understand the whole dynamic picture of the lipids in the body. If it's up, then there's a strong possibility that you might have, arterial damage or lesions or something like that that's happening, that's causing it to go up a little bit. So we have to listen to it and try and look at, well, why is that happening? I think there is a lot of, the incidence of people being healthier with higher levels of LDL does seem to be convincing to me, but you can't say that, because as a scientist, you need a mechanism with an actual experiment, which you can't do. So you just have to accept.
Yeah, and I don't mean to interrupt, but there never was an actual study that showed the opposite.
Oh,
There
no,
was never an
absolutely.
actual
No,
study that showed that those things were dangerous and bad for you. And that's where people get lost. Like what you just said, we can't say it's safe because we don't know, but they are drilling it in how bad it is.
yes,
And meanwhile, there was never a study, it was a hypothesis. And the guy who made the hypothesis later on even said, maybe I was wrong. And it was too
yes.
late.
Yes. And the people that got that hypothesis are not even human, they're not even experts in human physiology. One was knew all about, it's either fish or rabbits or something like that. But anyway, and it's not compelling, is it? It's not great information when it's epidemiological and it's adjusted, it's manipulated, those sort of things. But I would say, I think looking at sort of particle sizes, which is really interesting as well. Pattern A, pattern B, these sort of things, which sounds more nuanced than it actually is. I mean, basically, you take the sample and you have a test tube with gel in it, and you just drop this sample in, and then you are able to see sort of where the density lines up. So if you imagine like a test tube, well, let's do it like that because that's how pattern A input. So you put it on its side, and you imagine that in that test tube, there's a big dark blob of of the sample, and then it's okay, and then there's another one here, and when you do a graph, you get this sort of look like this, which relates to sort of parts per million or however you want to view that, and that gives you a pattern. And then you can look, and if you drop it into the fluid, into the gel, and you get lots of blobs all the way through, you get a different pattern of concentration, and that's pattern B, and that's more dangerous. So it's really it's a simple phlebotomy that gets it pattern A, pattern B, and then the particle count can be misleading because it could be high, but you could still have lots of big fluffy particles. So then you get into, well, do we really fully understand? And then you get the lipoproteins that are attached, or the proteins that are attached. If they're high, that's really bad. Well, that's if you start with the premise that LDL is bad, because they're normally attached to LDL. So there's lots of things about the lipid panel. They're testing more and more and more, but they're still going with the premise that LDL is the problem. So if you keep that at the beginning, however you test it, and they're still saying, your risk of heart disease has gone up. Is it? Yeah, because you're still thinking, because it's related to the production of LDL or the presence of LDL in certain numbers. So I don't want to lose people. I probably have lost people there, but I think there's a lot more nuance to it. And I think you're absolutely right. It's just a flawed theory that doesn't basically stand up to scrutiny, a very basic scrutiny. And if you look at, let's go really, really basic. As over the last 40 years, the consumption of red meat has gone down, and the consumption of saturated fats has gone down, and the consumption of cholesterol has gone down, dietary cholesterol has gone down. Disease, has that done it? No, disease has gone woohoo through the roof. So a really big sort of global, broad picture, that hypothesis doesn't stand up at all in any way, shape or form, because the low fat, plant-based, kick out red meat and saturated fat way of living has just worked so badly in such a big way. And if you've got eyes and a brain, you can see that is absolutely the facts. People are walking around obese, and disease has gone through the roof, and red meat and saturated fat consumption has gone down. So, it doesn't take much of a leap to go, well, maybe something wrong with that hypothesis.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. Visiting with you is always such a joy. It's like visiting with an old friend. So thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. No, it's been a pleasure. And it's gone really quickly, isn't it?
Yes, it has. So don't forget to like and subscribe. And Stephen, can you tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm right here in the UK. The website is theukcarnivore.com, and basically everything's there. You can find me on Instagram as well, and that's the UK Carnivore.
Awesome. So thank you so much for joining me again. I appreciate it. And we will see you next time here on the Carnivore Revolution.